Ladies and gentlemen, our dear viewers, today we will discuss Russian dangerous quest for friends and weapons in the world. We will explore the potential consequences of this quest for international relations and global stability. Our invited experts and analysts will make every effort to shed light on this important issue. Please welcome Henry Keane.
Who is a friend? Someone who shares the same beliefs, aims to achieve the same goals, and will support you, as the dictionary enlightens us. But who is Putin's friend these days? Is it someone who doesn't support sanctions against Russia, doesn't condemn Russian aggression, doesn't take a strong stance against Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the one who provides weapons to Russia in the war, or perhaps someone who aims to change the global law and order alongside to Comrade Putin? Maybe even to incite a third world war, trying to put the blame on someone else. Today, we're discussing friends and alliances of the Kremlin's ruler. So in October, Vladimir Putin is heading to China. This will be the first foreign trip for the president of Russia after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for him. Beijing did not sign the Rome Statute, which regulates the ICC's activities. This means that Putin won't be arrested on Chinese soil. The last time the Russian president visited China was on February 4th, 2022. Remember? Yes, just 20 days beforehand the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Back then, Putin attended the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics and met with Xi Jinping. In the run-up of the visit, there were reports that Chinese officials had supposedly asked their Russian counterparts not to attack Ukraine during the Olympics to avoid, I quote, overshadowing this important event for China. So the Olympics ended on February 20th. And we all remember what happened next. Whether the Chinese leader communicated directly with the Russian president about this matter remains uncertain to this very day. Beijing, of course, claims not to have been aware of the Kremlin plans. Now Putin is going to Beijing for the third Belt and Road International Forum, whatever that means for China. According to Reuters sources, the summit will host the heads of the Russian energy companies Rosneft and Gazprom. It is not yet known whether any documents will be signed. The PAP informs that the Kremlin wants to conclude an agreement on the sale of more natural gas to China and plans to build the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which will pass through Mongolia and have an annual capacity of 50 billion cubic meters. This is the way Russia plans to replenish the decrease in trade with Europe. Comrade Xi invited Comrade Putin to China during his visit to Moscow in March this year. The leader of China, who had previously called the Russian president his best friend, then offered to drink to dry for the friendship between Russia and China. He also expressed his belief that the Russian people will support his best friend Putin in the presidential elections 2024. Let's take a quick glance back.
I know that the next year your country will host yet another presidential election. Thanks to your strong leadership, Russia has achieved significant success in reaching prosperity and well-being of the country. I am sure that the people of Russia will support you in your best efforts.
That was lovely. When bad people get in trouble, they do bad things. I've just quoted the United States President Joe Biden addressing Chinese issues in August. He implied, or rather stated clearly, that Beijing has become a ticking time bomb due to its economic problems and said the country was in trouble due to weak economic growth. The world's second largest economy, with a population of more than 1.4 billion people, is growing slowly indeed. The situation on the real estate market is disappointing investors and alarming economists around the globe. The World Bank downgraded its forecast for China's GDP growth in 2024 to 4.4%. China is gradually losing its investment attractiveness. Powerful international corporations are, for now silently, fleeing to neighboring countries like India and Vietnam. Washington and Beijing playing big sanctions tennis, imposing new sanctions on each other every year. Corporations find themselves under increasing pressure for operating in China. The most illustrious example is the relocation of Apple, of course. The maker of the world's most popular smartphones aims to produce 25% of iPhones in India by 2025, although previously they were assembled in China. A clear signal for other tech giants, is it not? Reuters writes that China's economic problems may push Xi Jinping towards test productions. America is rapidly strengthening its alliances with countries in the Indo-Pacific region and is significantly increasing defense spending. Even European countries that historically had a very relaxed European-style attitude towards almost everything are becoming increasingly wary of China, in particular because of Xi's friendship with Vladimir Putin. Russia and China both are calling their bilateral relations a borderless partnership. In recent months, media and global think tanks have published a number of investigative findings on covert Chinese aid to Russia. So what is Putin really going to China for? Experts are convinced that without Western chips or Chinese substitutes to them, Russia cannot continue to produce guided missiles such as Iskander, Dagger, Kalibr or Kh-101, which are used to strike Ukrainian cities. I bet you never guess what is the literally most live marker of tension between China and the US? Pandas. That's right. Beijing is pursuing so-called panda diplomacy. In case you were not aware of the fact, all cute bamboo bears in the world are the sole property of China. So these days, the Chinese authorities are planning to return all their pandas currently habiting in the United States zoos. Beijing only leases those bamboo cuties to friendly countries, and obviously punishes no too friendly ones with pandemic, an official panda exile back to China. The first states to have living proofs of China's goodwill were, how surprisingly, the USSR in 1957 and North Korea in 1965, and only late in 1972 the first pandas traveled to the United States. These happened right after President Richard Nixon normalized relations with China. Of course, bamboo bear diplomacy is more of a symbolic gesture than an actual diplomatic move.
Watch this.
Let's talk about another player whose friendship, as Bloomberg writes, has become a problem for China. This is the leader of DPRK, North Korea, who came to Vladivostok on an armored train. Oh, that's family thing. His father, Kim Jin-II, handed down the inheritance to little Kim Jong-Un, this very armored train. And the rest of the country just as well. Kim Jong-un's armored visit to Russia took place against the backdrop of numerous Western media reports about Pyongyang's readiness to transfer weapons and ammunition to Moscow for the war against Ukraine. The Kremlin, of course, said they did not sign any military agreements with North Korea. Well, listening to what the Kremlin says is clearly a waste of time. We all need to look at what the Kremlin does, as sanctions and actions always speak truer than the words of any of the Russian tsars. One way or the other, Bloomberg notes that Chinese leader Xi Jinping is unlikely to publicly criticize Kim or Putin. But Xi has the power and the ability to limit the scope of any arms deal they enter into. Life is funny, isn't it? The world has bated breath to see if one dictator will actually restrict the arms trade between two others. However, let's return to our muttons, Kim and his visit. The international media vented footage of handshakes between the two leaders of Korea and Russia against the usual dictatorial background, of course, of rocket and space equipment. As well, the two were seen raising glasses at reception during which the North Korean dictator wished Russia and its army a great victory and added that he always supports all Putin decisions and his country wants to further develop relations with Moscow. And that's it. The Kim family's armored train rolled back behind the armored curtain in an armored silence. No final statements, no official communiques on the result of the negotiations. However, it is clear what one expects from the other, writes CNN. Russia needs new supplies of ammunition and shells as an exhausted criminal war against Ukraine drags on, and Pyongyang has it. While North Korea, in return, other decades of sanctions due to its nuclear and missile programs, wants from Russia, literally everything, from energy and food to military tech. If Russia begins supplying North Korea with rockets, missiles and space tech in exchange for artillery shells, well, then the entire world could potentially inherit a much broader global fallout from Russia's invasion of Ukraine than has hitherto been the case. And perhaps, unfortunately, the demand for armored trains around the world will increase sharply. Because cooperation between two dictatorships, North Korea and the Russian Federation, is becoming increasingly dangerous, says the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Let's hear him out.
Now, we're seeing this as a two-way street that is increasingly dangerous. With, on the one hand, a Russia desperate to find equipment, supplies, technology for its ongoing aggression against Ukraine, but also a DPRK that is looking for help to strengthen and advance its own missile programs. We're working hand in hand with other partners and allies to highlight the dangerous ways Russia and North Korea's military cooperation threaten global peace and security.
Obviously. Surely man shall not live by mere Kim and Si alone. The British magazine The Economist published in March the so-called Putin's Friends rating. There are 12 countries on the list, or rather said blacklist, if you like. The countries were distributed according to 11 indicators of support of coercive potential in 3 areas: military, diplomatic, energy, and economic. Journalists call the team of friends motley and tending to reduct. So there are the ratings. The first places were shared amongst Belarus, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Kazakhstan. All these countries are members of the CSTO and the Eurasian Economic Union. Also, Iran is on the list. Well, the country sends kamikaze drones to help Russia continue its shelling of Ukrainian cities. So Iran is very Putin's friendly and is on the blacklist, and rightfully so. Next comes Syria, China, Venezuela, Nicaragua, India, and Uzbekistan. So when we talk about Putin's friends among the current leaders of European countries, then, fortunately, nothing tells us there are no such people. At one time, the Russian president was friends with former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, former Austrian Foreign Minister Karen Kneißl, and the late Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. Former French presidential candidate Marine Le Pen still sympathizes with Putin. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban does not consider the Russian president to be a war criminal either. Official Budapest is trying in every possible way to block support for Ukraine and its integration into NATO and the EU. Orban, like no one else, knows how to love Russia profitably. Orban is like, you first unfreeze those 30 billion euro funds allocated to Hungary, but subsequently frozen, and my love for Russia might weaken enough so for EU support for Ukraine to go through smoothly. Following Orban's logic, if EU tops up the deal on extra 30 billion, Hungary will just love Ukraine and Orban becomes Zelensky's best friend. If, of course, Zelensky needs that kind of friendship. But leaders of the states, that's not all yet. There are plenty of people, usual people, willing to support pro-Kremlin narratives on YouTube, for example. The American podcast Redacted, with more than 2 million subscribers, hosted by the married couple Clayton and Natalie Morris, systematically plays along with Moscow. They spread conspiracy theories. They say that the West started the war in Ukraine and Russia and China are striving for peace. So recently, Clayton and Morris is a former Fox News channel host. Why am I not surprised? Recorded a video with the following message: the rapprochement of Russia, China, and North Korea is causing panic in the West and a desire, mind that, to start a new world war. The author believes that the American authorities do not care about their citizens, but are leading the world to a new global war. Morris criticizes US financial assistance to Ukraine and NATO military exercises. And he adds that the Third World War is already ongoing, although without military action, whatever that means. I just love how blatantly that rubbish is put.
Watch this.
Maybe if you don't want to lose friends, you don't have to start making enemies. Maybe that's a good piece of advice for Mr. Putin. I was recently thinking that there are so many questions running in my mind that I would love to ask them and to talk for more about all this things happening in the world around me that I would love to ask these questions to someone I really know and respect. My dear friend and a colleague, Simon Shuster, senior Time Mag correspondent, is with us tonight at this very studio at the Gaze. Talk for more.
Watch this.
I have a lot of questions to you, Simon, but we're not expecting any precise predictions. We are very interested in your personal opinion. As a correspondent and as a person, maybe we will be able and lucky to see that thin red line that divides the two. Okay?
I hope so. I mean, as a journalist, my specialty is usually the present, and the recent past. Not so much the future, but we'll see.
Oh, great, no predictions. Well, tell us about your feeling. Well, like my first questions, yeah. Putin meets Iran and North Korea, I mean, the leaders of this country. Mm-hmm. And everyone is like, the world shudders, the world is afraid. Is the world afraid? Do you think? Do you feel that?
I don't sense that, no. It seems rather ridiculous, yeah. I think the whole charade with Kim Jong-Un coming on his magic armored train, yeah, because he's afraid of invisible assassins, just like his father and his grandfather before him. The whole thing was rather circus-like. And I think it's deeply humiliating for Putin. I think he feels that he has no friends other than these to call on, the pariahs of the world, the ones that are under as strict or stricter sanctions than him. This was not the way Putin, I think, envisioned his reign when it started. He envisioned himself and in many ways achieved a seat at the table with global leaders. And now he's indicted by the International Criminal Court. I'm sorry, it's hard to imagine a greater level of isolation. So I think that hurts him deeply, and I think the world does not look at that and say, my goodness, there's some kind of great axis of evil forming, because they look rather pathetic.
So this is from piranha to pariah. That's a long way. What's next? But there are too many pariahs in one place. I mean, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. Maybe they have a plan. Maybe he's deeply hurt. He hurted his own feelings because he started the war in Ukraine. But what's next? What do you feel again?
The question is China. The answer to that question. I think the countries that Russia currently can call allies, right? Belarus, Iran to an extent, but not as solid as I think Putin would like. North Korea. This is not a kind of earth-shattering coalition. But if China decides to give more support to Russia, I think there we see the formation of something that's really alarming and concerning. But we don't see that yet. At least I don't see signs of that. I'm not a China expert. I'm not a geopolitical expert. My focus throughout my career has very much been on Ukraine and Russia and this region, to an extent Germany and Eastern Europe more broadly. But I think the sense is very clear among international political experts that if China gets more involved and agrees to support Putin and his regime more actively, that's a big shift. We don't see that yet. And from what I can see of China's behavior, I don't think they're leaning in that direction.
What if they will? The United States, what is the reaction? Well, it probably could be the reaction, but there should be a reaction.
I think there should already be a reaction. I would like to think, as an American citizen, that my government is gaming out some response to that diplomatically and otherwise. I don't know. Again, it's really not my area of expertise, but I think at that point, we would seriously be talking about some kind of major Cold War, if not a third world war on the horizon.
Okay, I will ask this question later on, but this is a very important question. Now, NATO is preparing to hold its largest joint command exercise since the Cold War in the spring 2024, as per Financial Times. More than 40,000 military personnel will practice in repelling staged Russian aggression against one of the allies members. Do you feel the world is on the verge of a new world war?
I certainly hope not, but I think it would be irresponsible for the Western allies to not prepare for a larger expansion of the war in Ukraine. President Zelensky has warned repeatedly. I think he hasn't been heard as much, but he has warned in his speeches that if Ukraine does not get the support it needs to win, to stop Russia in Ukraine, then we are looking at a wider war, because Russia will continue on, and its next attack could very well be against a NATO ally. And then we are talking about, a World War III scenario. That's certainly something that President Biden and a lot of the allies, Chancellor Scholz in Germany, have been really desperate to avoid even moving in that direction. But I think if they do not support Ukraine, if they don't give Ukraine the support it needs to prevent that kind of scenario where Russia's aggression is allowed to kind of spill ever further to the west, into other regions, other countries, then yeah, that's the risk.
Well, I mean, the United States is spending like $850 billion on military expenses every year. And now the United States spends like 3 or maybe 4% to help Ukraine. So if the United States and allies and Germany would really want this war to be over, it will be over. Do you think this is the case?
I think so. I think the more time passes, the less obvious that is to me. I think certainly earlier in the invasion, last year, at any point, a few months ago, if the support was equal to the capacity of the West to help, then yes, I think Ukraine would be able to win this war. We can talk separately about what that means, what that looks like, but regain all of its territory. I think there's certainly a lot of people in the leadership in Ukraine who see victory more as the weakening of Russia to the point at which it can no longer attack again. That's another definition of victory, but we can talk about that separately. I think the West, certainly has the capacity to help. I think to some extent the price tag, you named this figure as a proportion of GDP. That's one way to look at it. I think the price tag is getting high enough that a lot of people are starting to ask the question of how much more. One thing that comes up in this context, in my mind, always is, what about this $300 billion war chest that is frozen in American and Western banks, the Russian reserves? We heard about that in the first days and weeks of the invasion, right? And then it kind of fell off of the agenda a little bit. Now and then we hear some talk about, why there are bureaucratic hurdles, red tape, legal lines that are difficult to cross, precedents that the West doesn't want to set in seizing these reserves. But excuse me, one question that comes up is, okay, if you don't want to spend taxpayer money to help Ukraine, what about that war chest?
But why not to spend some taxpayers' money on that? I mean, this is about the human values, or the West collective West keeps on telling everyone and itself that it is all about the human values. But human values is a universal thing. It should be working all across the human universe. And it doesn't work only in Oklahoma or New York or Kiev. It should be working everywhere. And if wants to spend like even 10% of just the military budget, I'm not talking about the GDP of the United States, of course. Let's spend 5%. The war will be over already, and that's it. So maybe the whole world is just not ready for that.
I think what you touch on there is the information war to an extent.
Absolutely.
This is very much the framework in which President Zelensky has been looking at the war since the very beginning. He's wanted to convince the world that this is not just some territorial dispute at the edges of Europe. This is a war that touches the interests of everyone around the world. And he's tried consistently to explain that. It's difficult. It's a difficult job. I think his partners and allies in the West haven't quite found the way to express that to their own citizens, their own electorate, in a way that convinces people around the world that, yes, we need to help Ukraine, not just because it's the morally right thing to do, but because it's our own national self-interest, right? I think that's the difference, the line in the information war that President Zelensky and many of his allies have tried to cross in convincing people of the kind of national self-interest here. But if you look at the messaging coming from the leadership in Kyiv, That's what they're trying to argue. I think their arguments are quite sound, certainly as regards many European countries, all European countries, members of NATO, but in many ways also the global South. If you look at food supplies, right, the kind of threat and the damage that this war has done to export routes out of Ukraine for grain, this affects many regions around the world, Africa, the Middle East, I mean, you name it. So I think that is an important message for President Zelensky and his allies to get across. I don't think they've quite gotten there yet. This matters to everyone. This is not just a charity case. This is the self-interest of the nations who are providing the aid.
Our next guest is on the line. I just got the message. Mr. Andreas Umland, hello.
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 Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, lucky to have you. Schönen guten Tag, Herr Umland. German political scientist, research fellow at the Swedish Institute for International Affairs. We have in our studio my dear friend and colleague Simon Shuster, senior correspondent from TIME Mag. We've been just discussing what can be done by Ukraine to deliver the image of the country at war to everyone. Because I've been in New York, Simon. I've met you in your TIME office. I've been talking to people on the street, and I've asked them a question: did you know what's going on in Ukraine? And someone said, yeah, I know, that's in Russia, right? So obviously, the society is not that well informed, and obviously, Ukraine is not delivering enough its message to Western politicians, to Western people, why the United States, one of the main allies of Ukraine, should be supporting Ukraine. The aid should be unwavering until the victory is achieved, because this is of human values. Maybe you gentlemen have something to propose. Maybe you know how to do it, or at least let's speculate about that. Let's just talk for more about it. Mr. Umland, you're going to be first. I'm asking you a question.
I think it's very seductive here to see this war as just another post-1945 war that is similar to the many wars that we've seen across the world since the creation of the United Nations and the end of World War II. But this war is different in at least two ways. First, it's a plain war for territorial expansion. It's not just a conflict between Ukraine and Russia, but Russia is actually extending its territory at the expense of Ukraine. And both of these countries are members of the United Nations. And moreover, Russia is a member of the Security Council, a permanent member of the Security Council, and is using its veto power in the Security Council to secure, so to say, its territorial gains and to expand its territory. Ukraine, many people don't know that, is a founding member, unlike the Russian Federation, of the United Nations. The Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic was in 1945 already a member of the United Nations when it was founded. The Russian Federation was not. The Soviet Union was a member,
of course, yes,
of the United Nations. And now Ukraine is losing territory to this new country that emerged in 1991, the Russian Federation. The other specificity of this war in comparison to other wars is that, in my opinion, it includes a genocide. It includes a targeted attempt by Russia to destroy the Ukrainian nation. For instance, illustrated by the deportation of apparently tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of Ukrainian children from Ukraine into Russia or into the occupied territories, displacement in the occupied territories in Ukraine that are under Russian control, and then their re-education and a change of their identity, their national identity, partly even their individual identity. Apparently, there are even cases where the names of the children are changed so that they cannot be traced. And there are many other signs that I think support an argument that this is not just the usual war that you have, but this is actually a genocidal war. In German, we would even say perhaps Vernichtungskrieg, a war of annihilation. It's not the same as one should also say as the Nazis' war, and there are no gas chambers as far as we know. But it is still an unusual war in the post-1945 period in that it includes this targeted attempt to destroy an entire nation by killing people, by deporting people, by re-educating children, by terror campaigns against civilian targets, civilian infrastructure, by trying to destroy the Ukrainian culture, state, and nation. And this makes this war different from the many other wars that we've seen in 1945, and that should ring alarm bells around the world. It also puts under question, by the way, the nuclear non-proliferation regime, because Russia is, of course, behaving the way it is. It behaves because it has nuclear weapons. And well, Ukraine has to behave the way it behaves because it does not have nuclear weapons. And Ukraine is forbidden to have nuclear weapons by the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and Russia is explicitly allowed to have nuclear weapons by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And that puts the whole logic of the non-proliferation regime on its head, and it actually encourages both revanchist powers to obtain nuclear weapons, and it also encourages, maybe that is something that most people, which is least acknowledged, potential victims of revanchism to perhaps also obtain weapons of mass destruction, because they don't want to be in the position of Ukraine. They don't want to be as stupid as the Ukrainians who gave up their nuclear weapons in the 1990s in exchange for the well-known Budapest Memorandum. So this is really a major attempt to destroy the whole international security system, not just the liberal international order. This is not only about democracy and freedom and individual rights or something like this. This is really about the order of states, borders, territorial integrity, political sovereignty, and elementary international security.
Let's take it to another level. Let me ask you, gentlemen, if that will be for us to decide, what do we do about it? You're absolutely right, Mr. Umland. I agree with you. I think Simon agrees with me just as well. These things are right that you say. So what do we do? Obviously, the whole system, each and every system of our world is not ready for that. I mean, the Security Council presided over by Russia. Absurd, isn't it? And like people are looking for mechanisms and for excuses just to stand up and go away, not to talk to Russia in that tone, because Russia is killing people. Russia is abducting children. So what do we do about it all? You stated the facts. I believe you. I understand you. I'm with you. I agree with you. But what do we do? What's the next step? I mean, let's speculate. Let's talk about that. What do we do to change the course of events? What do we do to make the United States understand that clearly the weaponry has to be delivered right here and now as fast and as soon as possible? What do we do about German Chancellor that goes back and forth with the decisions, but now maybe better? What do we do for the world to understand that Ukraine is only the start? If the monster would be able to devour it, it would devour anything else.
Well, maybe Simon wants to say something, but no.
Yeah, I think you're much more better equipped to answer these kinds of questions. I'm not a political strategist. These are some of the hardest questions that you've put on the table that the geopolitical minds of the world should be working on, I hope. Again, as a journalist, I observe and I record and I try to get to the crux of what is happening. So I would rather pass it on to the expert in global affairs to give us some idea of how to change the kind of it's beginning to feel like a stalemate, at least geopolitically, at least in terms of, the conversation at the global level at the United Nations. I was there. I think we were both in the hall when President Zelensky addressed the UN Security Council. The Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia was not in the room. He came in a bit later, before President Zelensky had his chance to propose some fairly well thought out reforms to the UN Security Council. But I think the structure, as you've both pointed to, the structure of the UN Security Council looks a little bit laughable when you have Foreign Minister Lavrov walking in right after President Zelensky spoke, and continuing to regurgitate these pretty genocidal claims against Ukraine. Again, justifying the war of aggression that Russia started, and continuing to block any attempts at the international level with the established structures, the established levers of power that the world is supposed to have to act together to stop this kind of aggression. So I think, there's some certainly reforms called for of the available mechanisms that the world has since 1945 to deal with this kind of aggression, because the ones we have are certainly not working. But how to fix them, I think it's better left to the experts, not the journalists.
Mr. Umland?
Well, there are different strategies. Some are in the field of public diplomacy. I think one lacking element here is perhaps so far more activity in terms of public democracy, diplomacy in the global south. I think there is not a good understanding of in the global south of the nature of this war, and also of the genocidal aspects of Russia's war. And there is also, I think, just a lack in Western countries, of course, that perhaps where people just can't believe these sort of crimes and the scale of these crimes, that we're not talking here about, let's say, a few hundred children, but apparently about tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of deported children. So this is something to be done. Something that I also cannot really assess how much that is possible is to return to the entry of the Russian Federation in 1991 into the United Nations and into the Security Council, because there was no actual accession of the Russian Federation to the United Nations. It simply took over from the Soviet Union the seat in the General Assembly and in the Security Council, and there was no orderly process of the accession of Russia, and so that perhaps has to be questioned now in light of the behavior of the Russian Federation, and we may now return to this. This is something that could be done. The other aspects, I think, are very well discussed. I mean, that's the military help for Ukraine, the support in economic terms. Something that I think the Western countries should also think about is how much their own interests are violated on the Ukrainian territory. The narrowly understood national security interests of Western countries that are violated on Ukrainian territory. This concerns, for instance, the embassies of the Western and other countries in Kiev that are under weekly attack by Russia when Russia attacks Kiev. And now these Western representatives and diplomats and other Western representatives have to rely solely on the Ukrainian air defense system for their protection. The same goes, something similar goes for the nuclear power plants in Ukraine. If something happens there, something disastrous, that would, of course, not only then concern Ukraine, but also neighboring countries where, let's say, radioactive clouds may fly to, as we had in 1986 when the catastrophe in Chernobyl happened. By the way, Chernobyl is, again, actually a quite risky risky place because the reactor is still there, the destroyed reactor. There's now this so-called sarcophagus above it, and if the sarcophagus is destroyed by the war in one way or another, this would just be Chernobyl number 2. And as Simon already mentioned, the grain transportation system is, of course, also of vital security interest to Western countries because it increases inflation, it increases the price of grain, of flour, of bread in the world, and this then indirectly also increases the flow of refugees from countries that are suffering from hunger. And these refugees, they, surprise, surprise, do not flee into the Eurasian Union, but into the European Union. And we have too many of these refugees, or at least that's how it's perceived. So this is also of vital national security interest for Western countries to protect the grain transportation and storage system. And you know, you could say, well, that's very sad, but we can actually do something about it. We have air defense systems, air forces that could protect our embassies, or the nuclear power plants, or the grain transportation system.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your expertise. Hope to have you very soon back with us and we can discuss all the matters that we want. Goodbye. So, but do you think, Simon, that United States is thinking of Putin and is somewhat afraid of Putin and of his nuclear weapons? Do you think that United States, or do you believe that Putin would go nuclear?
Yeah, I do believe he would. Yeah, I think it's perfectly possible that he would, in a moment of desperation, use a tactical nuclear weapon in this war. I think the American government sees that. They seem to gradually take steps that President Biden and his team said at the beginning of the invasion are impossible, too escalatory, and gradually they come around with certain weapon systems, providing weapon systems, other moves, including sanctions that before Biden said were posed too much of a risk of some kind of nuclear response, right? An escalatory spiral that would get us to that red line that no one wants to cross. I don't know. I think one thing that President Zelensky has been trying to do since the very beginning of this invasion, certainly, is to help the West, encourage the West to overcome their fear of this Russian juggernaut. And slowly, over the course of the last 19 months or so, we've seen the image of Russia as the kind of great military power that was looming over Europe slowly deflate. And I think that has affected the level of willingness and courage on the part of the West to step up and really challenge Russian aggression and step up against it. But there is that fear. I mean, in answer to the question you posed to Mr. Umland, I think the main obstacle is still a fear of that escalatory spiral. I think it comes down to an extent to the president that we have in the United States today. He's a very cautious person. He's been in the kind of geopolitical game for decades. He's been doing this a long time, since the Cold War. And that's just the way he thinks. It's the way he operates. It's the way that many of his key advisors operate. They are generally more risk averse than some of their predecessors. And I think, in a way that is good. That is what their constituents want them to be. They certainly, the American people certainly don't want to get the United States involved in a direct conflict with Russia. I think the opinion polling supports that very much. But I think over time, the American leadership and the American public have seen that certain steps that try to contain, limit, and defeat Russia in this war are working. More is needed, but they are working, and they are not causing the kinds of reactions.
Right,
I mean, I think time and again, Ukraine has called Russia's bluff over and over. Putin has, from the very beginning, in his declaration of war, offered veiled threats of nuclear attack, of nuclear escalation, and the world has repeatedly called his bluff. it's a very dangerous game of brinkmanship that the West is involved in here. But I think they have to take stock of what Russia is capable of, but also its actions so far. Its actions so far have shown that when it is faced with resistance, when it's faced with strength on the part of the Western alliance, on the part of Ukraine, it tends to back away. I mean, that's happened time and again. It happened in the Kherson region. You remember the city of Kherson. Putin still publicly, supposedly, claims that city as Russia's forever, right?
Well, Putin does that all the time with all the cities of Ukraine. Everything belongs to Putin, and give him the universe, that won't be enough.
Right, historically Russian lands.
Historical Russian universe, I mean, and that's where we're living in. But if that was a bluff after bluff, why do you believe he will actually go nuclear? Because that will be the end of it, I mean the end of Russia. Because every country, Germany, the United States, I'm absolutely sure, is keeping a very close eye on Russia, what's going on. As soon as the house is open, that's it.
I think if you watch closely the rhetoric on some Russian propaganda TV channels, and some of Putin's rhetoric as well, I think it's clear that they've developed almost something like a death cult in terms of the way that they see their mission in fighting this war. They see it as a war of survival for Russia. You start hearing these things on Russian propaganda channels like, we don't need a world if it doesn't have Russia in it, right? This has almost become a slogan that they repeat like a mantra now on Russian state TV. That kind of thing is very scary. It feels almost as if you watch enough of Russian state TV, which I wouldn't advise if someone wants to maintain their sanity, you get the sense that they're psyching themselves up for this kind of great epochal global war. That is scary. But that could also be part of a complex bluff, right? To sort of scare the Western analysts who are also watching these TV channels, who are also watching this rhetoric, to scare them into whispering into the ears of Western leaders, hey, watch out, don't cross this line.
What line? All of the lines has been crossed. I mean, there's so many red lines that have been crossed. It's a mess.
Yeah, I think the great test. From what again, I'm not an expert in American politics as such, but from what I understand of the conversations that go on in Washington among policymakers, they see or they wonder if Crimea is a red line that would lead Putin. If Crimea is under threat, if Ukraine manages or gets close to retaking its sovereign territory in Crimea. That could be the point at which Putin kind of goes nuclear with some kind of tactical nuclear weapon. I think some of the military strategy on the part of Ukraine has attempted to test that hypothesis in a way by pretty aggressively attacking military installations, supply routes, bridges, infrastructure in Crimea that Russia has used to supply and support its war machine in other parts of Ukraine. So we'll see, but I think that is a red line that we should keep a careful eye on. It's also one where I think Putin's latest bluff could be called.
Crimea is Ukraine, so. But I understand when you say that. There's another red line and another red line. But then again, the world was not ready. But if the world would be ready, the world would be over already. That's what I think. But
I don't really necessarily agree. I mean, if you read carefully Russia's military doctrine and you listen to some of these military experts, they seem to believe that it's not all or nothing, right? That they could escalate to with a tactical nuclear strike,
right?
Not one of these kind of city buster bombs, right? That were the nightmare of the world during the Cold War, and to some extent still are today. But a smaller weapon, a nuclear weapon that the Russians seem to believe, at least according to their rhetoric, their public statements and their military doctrine, could scare away everyone. Could essentially force the West to say, okay, back off. This has gone too far.
Okay.
They seem to believe that it's at least possible, if not likely, that the West would see an attack like that and essentially hand Russia a victory, that it would not lead to some kind of nuclear exchange.
You mean a victory over Ukraine?
Victory over Ukraine, victory over the collective West, as they see it. I think that's where rhetorically Russia is headed, in the way that at least Russian state TV seems to be preparing its citizens for a coming phase of this.
That
this
is an
war.
escalation.
That would certainly be an escalation. It's not at all clear what the response would be. I mean, some of these things are just horrifying to even even fathom
yeah, exactly.
and think about. But I think it would be irresponsible on the part of global leaders and journalists and observers and analysts generally not to begin thinking through these things, because right now we have Russian forces occupying Europe's largest nuclear power plant. That is itself a ticking nuclear time bomb.
Absolutely.
And the fact, going back to an earlier part of our conversation, the fact that the international community, the IAEA, is not able to doesn't have the mechanisms to resolve even that small, relatively small, but extremely dangerous part of this war is shocking. And I think, points more clearly to me than anything else that the international institutions that are supposed to limit conflicts, supposed to resolve conflicts, are just not working. You have that occupation going on now for many months, better part of 2 years, and there's no end in sight. The Russians are mining that facility. They're using it as a staging ground to launch artillery at neighboring towns. I mean, it's insane. You couldn't think of this stuff in your worst nightmares a couple of years ago. I've been covering Russia and Ukraine for many years. This is the stuff of complete, nightmare scenarios, but we're living in them.
How long are you working for the Time mag already?
A long time. I've been on staff at Time magazine since 2013.
And you've done more than 40 covers.
I don't know, I lost count, but it's something like that. It's like 20 to 25, 40, a lot. Yeah, the record was, last year we had, I think, 6 or 7 cover stories about Ukraine. It goes to show just how much of the world's attention we were able to concentrate on this war, just how much outrage there was around the world. That is a signal of the historical, I think, gravity and significance of what's happening in Ukraine. That we, our coverage was so intense, in many parts of that year, to the exclusion of
right.
many other, important issues that were happening around the world. Last year, we covered Ukraine very extensively, but as you see, I think unfortunately, but as you see across the international media, in the United Nations, there's a push to, go back to other issues on the international agenda. I think in the United Nations, we saw this during the General Assembly, where
we did.
A lot of countries say, hey, enough about Ukraine already. Let's continue talking about sustainable development. Let's continue talking about climate change, all extremely important issues. And I don't mean to diminish them in any way. But it was interesting to see that dynamic of, certain large countries, even regional groups of countries, saying basically, enough about Ukraine already. And President Zelensky, President Biden, and many of their allies trying to remind the world, no, we can't take the focus off of Ukraine. But again, President Zelensky saw from the beginning of this invasion that this is going to be a challenge, that the world's attention span is limited, and it's going to be a challenge to keep the focus on Ukraine.
What about the book? I know you've written a book about Zelensky, First Lady, Zaluzhny. What is it about? When it comes out?
It's supposed to be published in January. I'd say it's kind of a wartime biography of President Zelensky. You could think of it as, in some ways, the invasion through President Zelensky's eyes. Because of my reporting in Ukraine over the years, and because of my acquaintance with him for some years before the invasion, I was able to get pretty unique access to his team and to the presidential compound in Kyiv to observe the way that they experienced the war, the way they responded to it, as the events were unfolding.
Right.
On many occasions they allowed me, and I'm very grateful to them for this, to be a kind of fly on the wall and observe these historical events as they unfolded. And it was really a privilege and deeply fascinating and gratifying to be able to talk to them as the events were unfolding, as I said, but also before a kind of established narrative of the events of what had happened formed. So the perspectives that are in the book, the interviews that are in the book are very fresh. Fresh in the sense of, I was speaking to the participants in these historic events as they happened and getting their perspectives kind of almost in real time. And the book is, it covers the years leading up to the invasion. It covers quite a bit about the history of the war going back to 2014. It covers President Zelensky's biography, going back to his childhood in Kryvyi Rih and his career as a comedian, actor, producer, showman. But I think the most of the book is the period of the invasion and how it looked from the perspective of the high command in Kyiv, how they reacted to it, and how they experienced it.
When we will be able to read your book? When it's coming out?
It's coming out, supposed to be coming out in January.
Supposed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to jinx it, but that is the publication date.
Yeah, I know. There have been a lot of editing. I'm aware of that.
Yeah, it took longer than expected. The first conversation I had with President Zelensky about it, it was in the second month of the invasion. And he asked me, when's the book? Okay, this sounds like a good plan. You should go ahead and write the book. But when's it going to come out? And I said, maybe a year, or at least I want to cover the first year of the invasion. And his question was very serious and in many ways moving. He said, do you think the war is still going to be going on in a year? I did. He, I think, still was holding on to the hope that it could be resolved in a matter of weeks, months. That was certainly his goal,
right. Well,
to find some way out. But tragically, the war is still dragging on, almost 2 years in. The book's going to be published about a month before the 2-year anniversary of the invasion. And we all hope and pray that by then there will be a victory for Ukraine. What that victory looks like, as we said earlier, is kind of open to debate.
Amen to that. But in your book, 2 Zelenskys will be depicted. Zelensky before the war and that arch to Zelensky after the war. There are 2 different personalities, aren't they?
He changed very dramatically, and we talked about this with him. He admits that. I'd say the book depicts a kind of spectrum or an evolution of Zelensky. Right. The man I met in March 2019 when he was running for president is almost unrecognizable when compared to the president the Ukraine has today.
I believe so.
The change has been really dramatic. Of course, most of all in the period of the invasion. After the invasion, he became a kind of world leader and symbol of resilience that many Ukrainians,
indeed,
and many of his peers around the world did not expect him to be. Where he found that kind of where he found those reserves of strength and courage and whatever it took to stand up and survive this thing. That's kind of what the book explores to a large extent through conversations with him and his friends and allies and people close to him. So hopefully it provides an answer to why that evolution, why this person seemed to be a fairly good fit for the job that was thrown into his lap.
A fairly good fit. That's a nice term to use. My last question, a very short one. What are the plans?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at a certain crossroads now in the history of the invasion, and I want to cover that turning point, that fork in the road we've reached, where I think Ukraine and its allies are deciding, okay, are we going to continue on the path toward defeating Russia, or take a turn that leads us to some kind of frozen conflict, a kind of stagnant front line, and so on. I think that is the choice fundamentally, to put it very crudely, that the world is faced with. President Zelensky is, of course, pushing very hard for the world to continue its support toward victory and defeating Russia, but it's not yet clear which path the world is going to take, the United States, the European allies. So that's what I want to look at, and I want to see, how President Zelensky and his team are thinking about that kind of fork in the road, and doing everything they can to make sure the world takes the right turn at that fork.
Mr. Shuster, Simon, I'm honored to be your friend and colleague. Thank you so very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
And for your effort and for your expertise. We are hoping to see your book very soon.
Thank you.
Dear audience, it was The Gaze and my show, Talk for More. It was Henry Keane. Love to work for you. Thank you so very much and hope to see you soon with us again. Goodbye.